Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex is an odd specimen. I don't know what it is, but I can never actually decide what I think of it. Some days I'll wake up and while having breakfast, I'll think to myself, Wrath of Cortex isn't very good. But other days I'll wake up and while having breakfast, I'll think to myself, actually, Wrath of Cortex is really good. My opinions on this game constantly change. And yes, I exclusively think about Wrath of Cortex while eating breakfast. Anyway, the point is, I can't make up my mind. I don't know if I like Wrath of Cortex and think it's good, or if I hate it and think it's bad. I'm tired of sitting on the fence. Not only is the fence uncomfortable to sit on and making my ass hurt, but it also makes it hard for me to talk about this game without getting tangled up in a web of my own conflicting opinions. And that's why we're here now. I'm going to finalize my thoughts on this game once and for all. Get ready to face my wrath, Wrath of Cortex. For those of you who don't know, Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex is the fourth main installment in the Crash Bandicoot series. It was pretty much Crash 4 before Crash 4 happened. It was released on the PS2, Xbox and GameCube. For this video, I played my childhood copy, which was the Xbox version. So that's why the Bandicoots look like they're made of carpet, in case you were wondering. The game was
developed by Traveller's Tales,
who are also behind Crash Twinsanity, but they're probably best known as the team behind the thousands of LEGO games that have flooded the market since 2005. It was their goal to carry on the legacy of the Bandicoot into the next generation and give us a marsupial-based platforming adventure even more exciting than the PS1 trilogy. It's a tough ask, but did they succeed? Well, I don't know, we haven't talked about the game yet. Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex does something that no previous Crash game had ever done. Spend 6 entire minutes laying out the plot of the game. But even though the opening cutscene drags on a bit, it does a pretty decent job of setting up the story. The plot goes like this. Uka Uka is furious with Cortex and his minions because of their repeated failures, and demands that they come up with a plan to destroy Crash Bandicoot, who is the cause of said failures. The villains then agree to use Cortex's secret project, Crunch Bandicoot, a genetically enhanced cyborg Bandicoot strong enough to eliminate our heroes, but he's missing a power source. Uka Uka proposes to release the Elementals, who are evil masks with the power to cause natural disasters, and use them as Crunch's power source to defeat Crash and take over the world. After Aku Aku catches wind of what Cortex and Uka Uka are up to, he, Crash and Coco set out to collect the crystals to imprison the Elementals, defeat Crunch, and stop Cortex once more. This story is actually really cool. Crash games generally aren't that strong in terms of plot. In the first game, although the background of Cortex using mutants to take over the world is interesting, it's really just a classic damsel in distress, Mario saves the princess type of story. Crash 2 is a bit more interesting, collecting crystals for Cortex to supposedly save the world, but what he really wants is to brainwash everyone on Earth. And Crash 3 is similar, only we now need to travel through time to find the crystals. They're very basic stories. That's not a bad thing, they're just very simple and straightforward. But Wrath of Cortex dials it up a notch with a plot that I personally think is more interesting than those of the original trilogy, mainly because of Crunch. Crunch Bandicoot is the ultimate Bandicoot warrior that Crash was supposed to be, and he uses the power of the Elementals to try and destroy Crash once and for all. That alone makes Crunch a pretty good antagonist. Crash and Crunch fight against each other to prove who the superior Bandicoot is. There's a proper rivalry there that Crash doesn't have with any other character besides Cortex, and I'm sure if Crash communicated in any way in this game, the two of them would have a very interesting dynamic. And as a standalone character, Crunch is pretty solid here. He's headstrong, overconfident, arrogant, he's got big, strong arms and chiseled abs and eyes you could get lost in for hours. As I was saying, Crunch is a pretty good antagonist in this game. It's just a shame that he would later become insufferable. And let's not forget about the Elementals. Having evil masks represent the elements of earth, water, fire, and air, and be the causes of earthquakes, floods, ice ages, and other natural disasters is a cool concept. And their personalities?
You want a piece of me, Bandicoot? Huh? Do ya? Huh? Wuss. Leave my levels alone!
Is there a draft in here?
Okay, as characters, they suck. But their sole purpose in the game is to provide Crunch with his elemental powers, so their personalities, as shitty and disappointing as they are, aren't really that important. But overall, this plot is pretty decent as far as Crash games go at least. It's just a bit unfortunate that 90% of the plot takes place during the opening cutscene. But I think that's enough about the story. Crash games aren't about the narrative, they're about the gameplay. This is what Traveller's Tales needed to get right to make this game a worthy follow-up to the original trilogy. And did they? Well, sort of. Wrath of Cortex follows the framework of a traditional Crash game pretty closely. You have linear level design, a main collectible, in this case crystals, crates to break, gems to earn, and every so often a boss to fight. There are also vehicles and power-ups scattered throughout the game, as well as time trial relics to earn. These are all things that existed in the original trilogy too. So, I guess the big question is, does Wrath of Cortex do these things as well as the first 3 games? Well, yeah. In fact, Wrath of Cortex handles its level design and game mechanics damn near identically to Crash 3. They have the same warp room structure, they have very similar level structure, being mostly linear levels with vehicles sprinkled throughout, they handle crystals, gems, relics, and boss fights in the same way, and they handle power-ups in nearly the same way, with the only difference being that Wrath of Cortex has an extra one. I think it's fair to say that as far as the game layout and progression system is concerned, Wrath of Cortex is on par with Crash 3. It doesn't do anything better, but it doesn't do anything worse, so I can't fault it. But what really matters is the experience of playing the game. It's all well and good having a decent progression system, but if playing the game feels like you've got diarrhea in your hands, then it doesn't matter how good the structure is, so let's talk about what it's like actually playing Wrath of Cortex. To properly evaluate how well Crash controls in this game, we need to wind the clock back a bit. In the first game, Crash's moveset was very primitive. He could run, jump, and spin, and that was it. Controlling him was also kind of stiff and janky at times. Crash 2 really polished up his movement, making his controls tighter and adding the slide and belly slam to his arsenal. Crash 3 expanded on this further with 5 new power-ups. I personally don't like the power-ups in Crash 3. The double jump and speed shoes are fine, but I hate the rest of them. They're either useless like the super body slam, or overpowered like the death tornado spin and fruit bazooka. But despite my own personal gripes, Crash still controls well in that game, and that's what's important. Wrath of Cortex tried to mimic the way Crash controlled in Crash 3. He has the same set of moves and the 5 power-ups returned from Crash 3, with the extra addition of the Sneak Shoes, a very situational power-up that allows Crash to tiptoe across very specific configurations of nitro crates that only appear in bonus rooms. I'll be honest, it doesn't really add anything to the game, so it's a bit of a waste, but hey, at least it looks kinda funny. I sometimes hear people complain about how Crash controls in Wrath of Cortex, but he actually plays very similarly to how he does in Crash 3 with some minor differences. The controls are still tight and responsive, he's just a bit floatier than before. But that's not a bad thing, he still moves exactly how you want him to, he still goes where you want him to go, you have just as much control over his movement as you had in the previous games, he just has a different weight to him. I think that people who complain about how Crash controls in Wrath of Cortex don't hate it because it's bad, they hate it because it's different. And that's how things like racism happen. Yes, he is slightly different than he was before, but that doesn't make it bad automatically. If you genuinely think that Crash controls badly in this game just because it's not exactly the same as it was in Crash 3, then I think you need to do some self-reflection and think about what's really important. I personally had no issues with controlling Crash in this game. He was very comfortable to play as, he didn't cause me any grievances, and the levels are built around his abilities decently well, so I'm satisfied with it. Crash's levels are generally also well designed. They're designed like classic Crash levels. They're linear, they twist and turn, they're littered with crates and hazards, there are regular levels, chase levels, vehicle levels. For the most part, they're everything you want in a Crash level. I mean, those are the elements that made the levels in the original trilogy so good. I don't need to explain what makes a good Crash level in much more detail than that, do I? I also want to say that the levels in Wrath of Cortex definitely feel bigger and grander than those of the original trilogy. It's probably because of the more powerful hardware, but the levels in Wrath of Cortex are bigger in size and more detailed than the levels in the first 3 games. And most importantly, they're generally pretty fun. I don't think that they eclipse the levels in the original trilogy, but they're mostly enjoyable. Except levels with monkey bars. Those monkey bars can go fuck themselves. Why do they have to be so goddamn slow? Why? Oh, there's also that weird invisibility crate that appears like twice. I don't know what that's all about. It lasts about 5 seconds and doesn't do anything but let you walk through lasers. Bit of a waste of space that one, but I figured I should probably mention it. Anyway, as I'm sure you're aware, there's more to Wrath of Cortex than just running around as Crash. For the first time in the series, Coco appears as a fully playable character in her own right. You actually get to do platforming with Coco. As a kid, I thought that was amazing, and I remember really enjoying Coco's levels, and I still enjoy them to this day. particularly Banzai Bonsai. At the time, it was really refreshing and exciting to play as a character other than Crash. I mean, sure, you got to play as Coco in some vehicle levels in Crash 3, but you never got to take full control of her until this game. And it's fun. I just have one complaint. The fucking sweep kick. Coco's sweep kick has got to be one of the most useless, pathetic attacks I've ever seen in a video game. It is never, ever useful. It baffles me why they didn't just give her the same moveset as Crash. I mean, they would have developed Crash as a playable character first. Playing as Crash is what you do for the majority of the game, even though that's technically not true because the majority of the game is vehicles, but I'll get to that in a second. The point is, Crash's moveset was developed before Coco's, so I don't understand why they then went on to make Coco's moves less useful than Crash's on purpose, when they could have just given her the same slide that Crash has. No one would have questioned it, but nope, they decided to give her a slow, useless sweep kick that everyone is questioning. Coco also doesn't have access to any of the power-ups besides the Super Body Slam and the Speed Shoes. Because she doesn't have the double jump or the slide, her movement is more restricted than Crash's, so her levels have to be built around that. But where some might call this a bad thing, I actually think it helps Coco's gameplay stand out a bit more. Coco's levels feel more reminiscent of the level structure from Crash 1 and 2, back when Crash's movement was restricted as well. The platforming is simpler design-wise than it is in Crash's levels, and they actually do feel like the kinds of levels you would play in the first two games, at least as far as level layout is concerned. It's a welcome change of pace that doesn't stray too far away from the core gameplay. So yeah, aside from her stupid sweep kick, I'm very happy with how Coco was implemented in this game. Okay, I've danced around the issue for a little while, but we have to talk about the elephant in the room. The thing that Wrath of Cortex is infamous for. The vehicles. This game is flooded with vehicles. Planes, minecarts, submarines, spaceships, mech suits, whatever the fuck this is. If it's a vehicle, it's in this game. This is what Wrath of Cortex gets criticized a lot for, and rightly so. Across the whole game, there are more levels that incorporate some sort of vehicle than levels that don't. That's bad. Or is it? I actually think that there's more to this vehicle issue than what's on the surface. Many will see that this game has a lot of vehicles and jump to the conclusion that they're all bad and that the game is bad and that life is bad. But the reality is a bit more complicated than that. The way I see it, there are two types of vehicle levels in this game. Pure vehicle levels and partial vehicle levels. As you might have guessed, pure vehicle levels are levels that are from start to finish entirely dedicated to the use of a vehicle. Think Tornado Alley or Smokey and the Bandicoot. Partial vehicle levels are levels that aren't entirely dedicated to a vehicle, but you do use a vehicle at some point in the level, whether that be starting the level in a vehicle and finishing it on foot, or the other way around, or briefly in the middle of a level. Think H2O No, Tsunami, or Gold Rush. Let's talk about pure vehicle levels first. Pure vehicle levels are the worst offenders for vehicles in this game. They are, at best, boring. They are, at worst, infuriating. That sinking feeling and Crash droids are somehow both. The vehicles in these levels just aren't fun to use, and the way you're supposed to complete them by destroying the targets is designed in a fundamentally annoying way in both of them, so they really suck the life out of you. Smokey and the Bandicoot is a hot mess of a racing level where you slip and slide uncontrollably as you try to drive in a straight line. Ice Station Bandicoot is a cold mess of a racing level where the only interesting thing is that there's a polar bear riding a magic carpet for some reason. Coral Canyon is a long, wet, and depressing slog that has way too many of those fucking mines, and the rest of the pure vehicle levels are just kind of lame. They aren't fun. However, there is one exception. There is one type of pure vehicle level that stands tall above the rest, the Atmosphere levels. No joke, I think this might be the most fun vehicle I've used in any platformer. Not even just Crash, I'm talking any platformer. The Atmosphere levels are genuinely so much fun. They're fast-paced, full of physics-based action, they're surprisingly open and give you room to explore. Even if you don't like this game, you have to at least admit that the Atmosphere is fun to use. In fact, it's so fun they brought it back for Crash 4. The real Crash 4, I mean. But yeah, generally the pure vehicle levels aren't very good. The Atmosphere is great, but that's about it. These pure vehicle levels just aren't really that enjoyable, and they're the reason why so many people dislike Wrath of Cortex. Which I find curious. Many people will complain that Wrath of Cortex has too many of these vehicle levels. The amount of pure vehicle levels in Wrath of Cortex is 13. These same people will also praise the hell out of Crash 3. The amount of pure vehicle levels in Crash 3 is 15. 4 jet ski levels, 4 motorbike levels, 2 underwater levels, 2 Pura levels, and 3 flying levels. Interesting, isn't it? I don't mean to be rude, but it looks like your bias is showing. Granted, if you count up all the levels that include any vehicle at all and include boss fights, Wrath of Cortex does have more vehicle-based gameplay than Crash 3 does, but that doesn't mean that this is a problem exclusive to Wrath of Cortex. They both have this problem, and it's not fair to go after Wrath of Cortex for it, but ignore it for Crash 3. If an arsonist burns down a house, and another arsonist burns down 2 houses, sure, the second arsonist has done more damage than the first one, but that doesn't excuse the damage the first arsonist did. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Anyway, then there are partial vehicle levels. In stark contrast to the pure vehicle levels, I actually think the vehicles in these levels are handled well. They're brief, they don't overstay their welcome, and they're an enjoyable way of mixing things up every now and then. They make levels feel more dynamic and distinctive. For example, Compactor Reactor is a level where you start off in a minecart riding along the rails until you reach the end of the rails and enter the lab and complete the rest of the level on foot. In that instance, the minecart, although it's not exactly the most fun vehicle in the world, is only there for a few moments and then you're quickly back to regular Crash gameplay. In that example, the minecart shakes things up, but it isn't the overwhelming majority of the level. It's only there for a brief section. That's good. That makes the level more interesting and dynamic than if you had just started the level in the lab and skipped the minecart altogether. If you then take a look at Ghost Town, a pure vehicle level that uses the minecart, you'll see that it's a pretty dull and boring level. If Ghost Town had started with that minecart and then led you into a regular platforming level in the same way as Compactor Reactor, that would have been a much more interesting level to play. By the way, just as a side note, I heard that you could beat Ghost Town without pressing any buttons, and I tried it, but I lost. If that isn't the perfect metaphor for how tragic my existence is, then I don't know what is. Most of the partial vehicle levels handle their vehicles well. Compactor Reactor is one example, but there are plenty of others that utilize brief vehicle sections well. H2O is one of them, having you enter the underwater lab with a submarine. Avalanche is another, where you use Coco's snowboard to escape an avalanche, and there's even a little flag challenge for an extra gem. That's fun! Some of the partial vehicle levels don't do as good of a job though. The mech suit in Droid Void and Crate Balls of Fire seems a little unnecessary, as it's just a regular platforming level with more restrictive movement, and the handcar in Gold Rush is kinda pointless too, but the rest of them are generally pretty good. I think the point I'm trying to make is that some vehicles in Wrath of Cortex are handled well, and others are handled badly. They are hit and miss. When a level is purely dedicated to a vehicle, it usually isn't fun or interesting, and you end up disappointed. It's like going to see a new movie and then finding out it's a musical. It's not what you wanted, you hate it, and you want your money back. Unless it's the Atlasphere, because the Atlasphere is good. But on the other hand, when levels are mostly platforming based but include a brief vehicle section, it can be a refreshing change of pace that doesn't drag on like a pure vehicle level would. Most of the time at least. It's a mixed bag. Another thing that partial vehicle levels are good for is actually making levels memorable, and that's something I don't think Wrath of Cortex gets enough credit for. Nearly all the levels in Wrath of Cortex are unique and distinctive. Sure, there are some that are very similar, but most of them are totally unique and memorable levels. This is actually something that I think Wrath of Cortex does better than the original trilogy. Yes, you can remember the level themes that appear in those games, but those themes are recycled multiple times, and there usually isn't much individuality to the different incarnations of those themes. If I said to you, tell me about the level Snowbiz, all you can really say is that it's one of the ice levels from Crash 2. If I said tell me about the level High Time, oh, it's one of the Arabian levels in Crash 3, I think it might be at night time. The theme is memorable, sure, but the levels individually are not. Wrath of Cortex does a much better job at having memorable levels. You can ask, tell me about Fahrenheit Frenzy, and you can say, oh, that's the level where you start off flying the copter pack through the lava caves, and then make your way on foot through the fiery lab. Okay, well what about Jungle Rumble? Oh, that's the level where you explore the jungle making your way past ruined temples, only to have to escape a stampede of rhinos by driving a jeep. Crash and Burn? That's the one where you start at the bottom of an island and spiral up the side of an erupting volcano. Most of the levels in the game, in terms of their settings, are unique, dynamic, and distinctive. Even the shitty pure vehicle levels like That Sinking Feeling are memorable because they have settings that no other level has. There's heaps of variety on display in this game. From jungles to castles to flooded villages to space stations to volcanoes to old western towns, there's a lot this game has to offer. And I bet you didn't even realise that the final level in each warp room is a lab with a theme based on that warp room's respective elemental, did you? There are so many memorable locations in this game, and that memorability is bolstered by the whopper soundtrack this game has. Wrath of Cortex might just have the best soundtrack of any Crash game. There are so many good songs in this game that really help bring the settings to life, or at least make bad levels like Smokey and the Bandicoot more tolerable. I would go into detail about why the soundtrack is so good, but honestly, I think it can speak for itself. I suppose I should talk about the boss fights. Boss fights in Crash Bandicoot games have never been anything special. They're usually pretty lackluster, and Wrath of Cortex is no different. Rumble in the Rocks is an okay fight conceptually, but it's pretty dull in execution. Drain damage is very basic and very easy, which is common for Crash games. Crashes to Ashes is one of the better fights in the game, and I like the idea of using the chase level concept and applying it to a fight. That's a neat idea, but again, the execution is just okay. Atmospheric Pressure is just a blatant ripoff of Engine's fight from Crash 3, only it's slightly worse. But the final boss, Crunch Time, is actually a really good fight. One of the better fights in the series, I'd say, and it can be challenging if Crunch overwhelms you and backs you into a corner. But yeah, just like my social life, there's not much going on here. I suppose if we want to bring this video to 100% completion, we have to talk about 100% completion, which is actually 106% completion for some fucking reason. Wrath of Cortex follows suit with the other Crash games when it comes to completion. You need all the crystals to beat the game normally, but if you want the secret ending, you have to do much more than that. You need to go back through each level and break all the crates to get all the crate gems, and go back again to get all the extra gems that might be lying around in death routes, colored gem routes, or behind other random challenges. Then you need to get the time trial relics. You need to go back and beat each level as fast as possible to earn a relic. Once you have enough relics, you then get access to secret levels in the secret warp room, where you need to go through to collect more gems, and then go through again to earn more time trial relics. Sounds like quite a lot, and it sounds pretty hard. But did I do it? Yes. I went through every single level. I broke every single crate. I collected every single gem, and I got every single platinum time trial relic. Silly video game developers, did you really think that your cheeky gems and time trial relics would be enough to hold me back from reaching my true potential? You fool! My power cannot be contained! I am unstoppable! Just kidding. In the Xbox and GameCube versions of the game, if you start up a new game and enter your name as Wombat, you start the game with 106% completion right off the bat. So yeah, I cheated. I still did do some time trials though, just so I could briefly relive going through the completionist nightmare like I did when I was a kid. And yeah, from what I remember, going for 106% completion was about the same level of difficulty as Crash 3, and is also about the same level of not being worth it at all. You go through all that effort to collect gems and relics for pretty much no payoff whatsoever. The only thing you get for achieving 106% completion is a secret ending, and it's kind of a strange ending. If you beat the final boss with 106% completion, you actually break Crunch free from Cortex's mind control, something that was not brought up in the game at any point until this moment. I always thought that was strange. They could have at least hinted at the whole mind control thing, rather than just randomly going, hey, by the way, mind control, right at the very end. It was kind of weird. Before I give my final thoughts, there are just a few bits and pieces I want to talk about first. One thing people complain about a lot when talking about this game is the load times. You know, how you have enough time to earn a medical degree before the game loads a level? But I didn't really have any problems with the load times. Maybe that's because I was playing the Xbox version through the Xbox 360, but I don't know. They generally weren't that bad. In terms of how the game looks, I mean, It's okay. Nothing too spectacular in terms of visuals. That's probably because this game was developed very early on in the lifespan of this generation of consoles. The game doesn't look bad or anything, it looks fine. It just doesn't look as good as other games from this era. Oh, but the character models are disgusting. I'd also just like to take a moment to thank this game for actually working. The frame rate was stable, there weren't any major bugs or glitches I experienced, the game worked. Mostly. It had the odd hiccup here and there, but it definitely works better than some other games I've played. So what are my final thoughts on Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex? What is my final verdict? Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex is good. It's good. It's not great, but it's not bad. It's definitely an enjoyable game. The gameplay is consistently fun despite being occasionally interrupted with a shitty vehicle. It has all the elements that made the original trilogy of Crash games great. There are just some areas that could use a bit more polish. Being able to play as Coco in platforming stages was a lot of fun, even if her stupid sweep kick still gets on my nerves. The plot is decent as far as Crash games go, although I think the elementals could have been utilised a bit better. There was a bit of wasted potential there. The soundtrack is godlike. It's an overall decent game, and I definitely think it gets way more hate than it deserves. Is it better than Crash 3? No. Is it better than Crash 2? No. But I will make what might be a bold claim and say that overall, Wrath of Cortex is a more enjoyable experience than Crash 1. For me at least. I just think Wrath of Cortex has more to offer in terms of fun gameplay, and I'd genuinely rather play through Wrath of Cortex than the first game. I get that most people would rather eat their own shit than do that, but I just honestly think it's more enjoyable. Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex is good. It's not bad, it's not great, but it's good. I think that sums up my stance on this game pretty well. That is, until I have breakfast tomorrow and my opinions change again.